What's up, folks? So, 2 weeks ago at this point, I started a conversation about generic pilots and kind of game balance because we were just looking at the XWA's beta points, and that really re-sparked the conversation about generics that had come up a lot during Atomic Mass Games' launch of X-Wing Miniatures 2.5. And you can see the title and thumbnail in this video right now, and if I remember to do it, up in the top here, you should see a banner that'll actually link you to that video as well. Hopefully I do that. If you don't see it and you're watching this, give me a nudge to make sure that I remember to go in and do that. So it took me a minute to go ahead and put together this second part. I wanted to give folks time to reply, and most of those replies were fairly early, so we took care of that fairly early on. But I wanted to go ahead and run through the comments that I got, some of the stories I received, and then I wanted to finish by actually taking a little bit of a retrospective look at some X-Wing lists, going all the way back to middle and early first edition, and then looking at late second edition to kind of check myself and see a little bit what was actually in the meta, because it's been long enough that I don't necessarily remember. So going right on through this, I did mention that people would spam things like the YV666. There was a time where it was just mass generic YV666. It was never that big of a splash, but man, was it a bummer to play against. And kudos Budo over here put the comment like, folks would spam ships that were easy to fly off the board with Ion. And yes, you can fly a YV666 off the board with Ion, but as I said in my reply here, you have to hit it multiple times. Each one of them you have to hit multiple times. You actually have to deal it 3 Ion tokens multiple times to the same target to actually walk it off the board and not get absolutely annihilated in the process. And these things were really chunky. You could kill one or two, but then it was just so much fire with the 180-degree forward arc that it was really tough to deal with those. Um, and they weren't even as bad as like triple Falcons were just a menace, and then the Upsilon spam were, oh, that was so. There are all these times where you just have like a mass of hit points flooding the board with as many as you can that also have a bunch of offensive power as well, and it's clearly gumming up the board in a way that the game was never really designed to play, because you shouldn't have a bunch of small bases just running into a wall of large bases whose entire purpose is just to not die. So that's what I referenced there. But I did think that it was a funny quirk to say, why would people spam that? This is one comment that I really wanted to cover. So this is Brendan Knight. So it feels like a few things are being conflated. What are people actually enjoying about generics? Is it the lack of a name, the lack of pilot ability, being able to essentially copy and paste a ship so that you're flying more of the same thing, which is simpler or easier? There's a few different things here, and I think that, for example, if you pipped limited generics, you're probably removing the thing that people like. Right, I get that. I definitely like the concept of building a list all of the same ship, as it enables simpler list building and piloting. I don't think that should be taken away. Fair. And I like what XWA seem to have done, which is that typically lower initiative ships get more loadout, but can be more expensive pilot-wise to build a list with, right? So you get that heavily customizable generic. I think that's a pretty good way to make them both viable, but also limit them due to cost, rather than the AMG approach, which was to make them strictly worse than a named pilot. I don't think lists should have to revolve around named pilots, a named pilot or pilots, but I think you should have the option to. If, for example, my favorite ship and pilot is Boba Fett, and I love building lists with it. Easier now since both of them, both AMG and XWA, have 8 points. I also really like that I can now fly 3 generic fire sprays. Is it too OP? I don't know, but I think loadout and slots are a great lever to rein that in. E.g. taking away VTG, veteran tail gunner, so I can double tap, would bring them down a notch. Now, once upon a time, triple fire spray was this menace that nobody wanted to put in the game because it would break the game. And I'm going to kind of go in reverse here because it was the most recent part I read. Now I think fire sprays are actually in a somewhat bad spot. It's still an incredibly powerful chassis, but we haven't seen fire sprays run away with the game at all since 2.5 launched, to my memory. I might be misremembering the Boba Kanan mess, but even that, like, it was a little bit gimmicky that popped to the top of the meta briefly and then disappeared. So the fire spray, I think triple fire sprays is probably less bad than triple defenders. They have a little bit less hits point than some of your truly large ships. They're a little bit more maneuverable, but that means they're easier not to get blocked by, easier to fly around. It doesn't seem too bad. I don't know, but on the comment there to build a list around a named pilot versus not, yeah, we'll go to the other comment. This is one of the really big challenges, and I covered it in the last video. I want to go ahead and cover it again, that it's very challenging to, where is this? Where was that? I think it should have the option to, yeah, there it is. The thing that people like is taking the same thing on repeat. Definitely, yeah, and this is especially challenging. So anytime you make a generic viable, there's always that math, and I mentioned this in the other video too. Anytime you make a generic viable, as in make it competitive, you have to multiply that competitiveness by some kind of factor to factor in somebody taking 5 of them, for example. And that has always been the challenge with generics. And I'm a little concerned in XWA, some of the generic pilots have the opportunity to take 4 to 5 ships that potentially could all carry proton torpedoes. Is that going to break the game? Probably not. Is it going to push some things out of the meta? Maybe. And some level, I do think 2.5 is more resistant to proton torpedo spam than some of the earlier editions. But that's always been one of the most frightening things about generic spam, is if there's a generic that has a torpedo slot and at least 12 loadout, or whatever the equivalent was at the time, you could just take proton torpedoes and just flood the board with them. And it was so much damage output that it was able to really kind of warp the meta in the game. And that's always the concern. You could take away the torpedo slot from those generics, but then you take away a lot of the options of what make that ship unique. So there's really kind of a lose-lose scenario no matter how you cut that. So I really appreciate this comment, especially conflated. There are a number of points in the conversation where I probably lumped a bunch of stuff together, and I was called out on that multiple times, that just having multiple named pilots with the same initiative in the same ship is not the same as having a bunch of those identical ships that all have the exact same initiative and no ability, so you don't have to remember multiple triggers. Like, I get the difference in complexity. Kind of a bigger question I had was, does that translate to competitiveness? Are there generic lists that you can actually run in a competitive way? And the problem is, you either give them enough points to be competitive with upgrades, and that actually makes them quite dangerous to named pilots, or they have to stand on their own stats, which either they have to be very efficient price-wise, or you just have to figure out another way to make them work. And I don't really know of a good way to do that. And that's one of the things that's been tried in every single edition of X-Wing. But we're going to look at those historic lists in a minute. Let me get through the comments first. Let's see. This is one I was really excited to hear this story. So this is Satanga 2. Thanks for the conversation. I totally get the difficulty of balancing and the danger that allowing multiple generics pose to the overall game balance. And I can also respect the idea that essentially there's just a skill gap issue where anyone that shows up to a group play event has to know at least a little bit about all game mechanics to do well. And that's the thing. I was really hoping to hear from someone who got into competitive play, you're running pure generic stuff, and did well and succeeded and either got deeper into the game or continued to compete with just their generics. Comment continues, but I still just like generics. It's probably the same reason that I play a game of one-page rules with my Adeptus Sororitas and never a true 40k game. 40k rules are absurd. I have spent hours digging through terrain rules for one interaction in a single game. I just don't have the time, patience, or frankly interest to learn about every single complex detail or interaction. Fair. I'm certainly even less inclined to try and teach the same to my Beer and Pretzels game group. In fact, some of the fun in the game for me is revealing those combos in real time for a true cinematic experience. That's fun. At the end of the day, I'm a casual player. I play games on story mode. I'm in it for the lore and the laughter rather than the grind. My challenge to XWA is, how can we design competitive tournaments to include a kind of story mode that doesn't just handicap your experience? Tournament play is a unique part of X-Wing that I want to share with as many people as possible, even if I'm probably only ever going to play in store events, which is no shame in that. In terms of the details, I actually love the pipped generic idea. And as you mentioned, differently costed named pilots, I realized that 90% of my vision of generics could be solved with cleverly designed generic loadouts, especially loadouts that are intentionally inefficient. Okay, it's still going to be difficult to balance the costs, but if we stuck to pipped loadouts, you could at least eliminate the completely OP generic combos. For true believers, it'd be cool for the OG ship to still exist, but with a similar 2.5 style high-end cost. The other easy solution is to reinvent hyperspace. Run a store tourney that only allows generics, minimal loadouts, boil a game down to dials and dice. That's interesting. Then once the newbies are hooked, you run a normal tournament next month. There's a million ways to do this, and the great thing about the XWA future is that we make our own rules. All I'm asking is for XWA to keep casual kids like me in mind. We aren't trying to ruin the experience for anyone else. We're just trying to knock out a 20-minute game of big team battle CTF on Blood Gulch after we put the kids to bed. Pretty sure that's a Halo reference. I know Blood Gulch is Halo. I played quite a bit of Halo, but I don't remember the map names. I actually only remember that map name because of Red versus Blue, which is terrific in-game animation if you haven't seen it. But so there's a lot there. I totally love the idea of stores doing just pure generic events with limited loadout. That's super fun. If you were to do a learner league where you did 1 or 2 games where it was pure generics with minimum loadout, followed by aces high, so it's just aces where you have one ship to figure out and you're piloting it that way, and then you go into an actual full-on game where you do a mixed list that you build however you want, that would actually be a really good way to kind of ease people into the game, learning both the simple pilots and the mechanics, and then the complex pilots and their tricks, and then kind of taking that to full picture. Something like that could be really fun, but this, I mean, obviously the beer and pretzels bit is great. And one thing that I keep coming back to in this conversation is that I fully respect the beer and pretzels gamers. I fully respect the competitive gamers. I fully respect the people that want to play whatever game mode they want. The part where I really struggle is the desire to have generics be tournament competitive, because that's the line where they really become a problem. If they compete where you can do a list of pure generics, you really have a lot of trouble kind of balancing that in any substantive way, because it's like, we made these generics powerful enough to compete. Oops, they're too good. Has happened pretty much every single time where generics have been really strong. They just end up right over that line where they're too strong. And even in this, mentioning loadout as the lever to pull, I have always, since I got used to it, the 2.5 system of having your squad points and your loadout points be separate, I think is really, really important, including with generics, so you have those levers to pull to balance. Otherwise, there's always the min-maxing where you say, like, okay, if I take these ships and then use like a fraction of the points that would have been their total loadout, I have 5 ships with proton torpedoes, being kind of the 1.0 example. I don't think there ever was a time where you have 5 ships with proton torpedoes, but let's not do that. But yeah, love this story, really enjoyed this, and I said so here. Let's see, there's a follow-up comment. I'm super pumped about narrative objective maps. And that, I think, is, I mentioned the Epic design that Paul's been doing, where they have new scenarios specifically for Epic. There's a shuttle escort mission that sounds really cool. One of the worst AMG sins was how uninspired the objective play was, given the Star Wars setting. Like, come on, you can't figure out a way to do a shield generator assault, a trench run, or a CIS blockade. Want to get wild? Give me points for taking an AT-AT on Hoth. The little narrative boxes they released at the end were heading in the right direction, but I know we can do more, and I have high hopes for the XWA in that area. Not too long ago, I did an unboxing of all the scenario packs. I've always been really excited about that direction. I think there's some really cool design space to play around with the scenario boxes and the card releases. That was great, and that actually gave me a lot of hope for a standard loadout narrative campaign experience for every single faction in the game. And that's probably the thing I'm most bummed about, is that we didn't get all the way there. We don't have a campaign pack for every single faction, or that includes each single faction at least once. We have a total of what? 6 factions included? Rebel, Empire, Republic, Separatist. 4 factions included. Yeah, which is a bummer, but anyway. Totally get that. Trying to squeeze in your games after the kids are going to bed. I also try to squeeze in my recordings after the kids go to bed. Let's see, we got this here too. Oh, yeah, this was fun. I was one of the playtesters in Alpha for the XWA points, and I can affirm that balancing generics was one of the highest priorities. I knew it, love to hear that from the team, though. Problem was, however, that every other attempt to make them better than they are now broke them. No surprise. I built a list so bad that I didn't even get a chance to test it before the more experienced people there looked at it and nearly vomited. The pips on generics are a method I would love to see more explored, but the XWA didn't have time to account for that in Alpha. That was something that the 312 Squadron did with the pips, which was pretty cool. Our local event this Saturday, we used the XW points though, and I've been practicing my list for a month now to prep. Ooh, I'd love to hear how that went. And I did have to ask what the list was, and it was 7 ships. So it was 6 generic TIE interceptors with Predator, and then a single TIE LN for objectives. Like 6 TIE interceptors with Predator is just, that's a very frightening thing to go through. 5 minutes. God. I don't think I ever liked that. Did I like that? Yeah, it's like that. I like all of these. I can't believe I hadn't done that. How dare I? Terrible. Let's go back and like these. Shame on me. I like that one too. Next up, and that was fun. It's always fun to hear from the XWA team on this, and it's always a nice reminder that they are parts of the community, so that's really cool. All right, here we go. As a recently returning 2.0 player, I appreciate the hype for having 2.0 and 2.5 tables side by side. I haven't tried 2.5 yet, but both versions seem different and fun. Glad to see there isn't a serious divide in the community. Yeah, it's fine. Objectives preventing you from just running away is a great point I hadn't thought of. It hasn't happened in my home games, but I've definitely thought about how it could be a problem. As a casual player, I love that generic ships exist because it lets you simply put more ships on a squad. I've tended to fly 3 aces for the most part. Whew, yeah, man, good times. But recently I've tried to spread out points and pull all my minis on the table. Put all my minis on the table. Nice. I can actually fly a lot more of the cool ships I have because I can add them in for cheap. I like the idea of having generics with more loadout costs for more squad points, perhaps even have the cheapest generics drop a few specific upgrade slots, like proton torpedoes, or like torpedoes. Don't know. Side note, part of why I love generics might be just that they have lore on the cards, and I totally missed this, and I really, really appreciated that comment. It's pretty cool and really brings a level of immersion in the world Star Wars. Yes. Doesn't have much to do with gameplay, especially tournament-wise, but I do like that. Yeah. Definitely one of my favorite parts of looking through pilot cards, learning where my new ship fits in the world, especially EU ships I haven't seen before. Fair point. For as much as it's fun to play a bunch of named characters, even from the movies and shows, it's also fun to play a squad of Academy pilots on their first real mission, or a test pilot of a secretly developed new ship. I like that playing the main characters isn't the only option, and you can play a swarm if you want a different style. Though I can see how that's a pain for balancing. Yeah. The ships designed to be swarmy, I think, are probably fine. Like your TIE line fighters and your vultures, those are probably fine. But if you can do 7 TIE interceptors, that's a problem. Which sucks because you do want to be able to do 3-point TIE interceptors, and then there's that line again. So I loved this comment too. Yeah, I really do see a future where the communities merge a lot more than they have been to now, and I do think the majority of players are a little bit more version agnostic and just kind of play the one they've played as per here. But yeah, just to highlight that again, the objectives just running away, objectives preventing you from just running away. That was one of the big justifications AMG had for creating missions with objectives, and one of the things that was most frustrating as a player for me. I would play in tournaments, I mentioned this before, where like Soontir or Kylo would run in, get half points on one of my ships, and then everything else would just spend the rest of the time running away and run down the clock. And that was never a good way to play. And it didn't happen every single game, but it happened often enough that I remember that with terrible clarity. So there's that. Gotta like that too. And we got more. I didn't reply to this one? Man, okay. I'm gonna reply to this one. Ian Maher. To add on more, X-Wing feels really unique to me in that it doesn't rely on playing as major characters. I would expect games to have you play as Luke or Vader, but X-Wing just lets you do your own thing. If you want to play your favorite character, you can, but you can also make a squad of cool ships, and it can work just as well. I like that. Makes it more personal and creative. I like the point about people having their own personal pilots. Very fun with repainting of ships as well, which I haven't tried yet, but it's so cool that you can just make your own unique squad of ships that can fit in the world of Star Wars. Yeah, and I love that. And that's always one of the cool things about Star Wars that I appreciate seeing. Even Legion just recently added the like generic Jedi General who you could customize with your upgrades and skills to make it more your Jedi. And that was one of those kind of unique things where it's a unique character that I really, really enjoyed. That one, of course, it's got the actual Force organization slot, so you can't spam them too much. So that was really cool. There's a lot here. These are the longer comments. Everything after this is going to be shorter, but I wanted to make sure to give these the time that they deserved. Then we got Whitaker 007. Generics are a part of several faction identities and are essential to swarm play. It's extremely difficult to fly a swarm in formation when they all have different initiatives, especially with the punishing self-bumping rules, which I think should be reconsidered and adjusted. And flying in formation is intrinsic to a dogfighting game, especially a Star Wars one. And yes, limiting complexity of every ship having a different set of abilities is essential to easing new players into the game, even more so if they're actually a viable option for competitive play and not just a dumbed-down version of the game. As the X-Wing Alliance points team have said, the goal of points costing is to make difficult choices. If anything is so good it's an auto-include, that's a failure of design. You will have to pick between high initiative aces with great abilities but little loadout, mid-range ships with fun abilities and fun ways to configure them, and expensive behemoths with all the toys. Generics fit into that picture as well, with some being cheap but with little or no loadout points, such as TIE fighters, mid-range chassis with a decent amount of loadout appropriate to their role, such as TIE bombers, and platforms with a ton of loadout for support, as in shuttles. This is not about making generics always a cheap value option. There are legitimate and interesting cases where a generic might be more expensive than a named pilot, but with more flexibility and loadout. In addition to the various roles that generics can take in the meta, not every generic ship needs to be viable. Fair. As you've already mentioned, several mechanisms that can be used to limit abuse. There should be relatively few cases where a list is made up entirely of generics, but it should be perfectly normal to see Darth Vader leading a swarm of TIE fighters, or Luke with a squadron of X-Wings and Y-Wings armed with proton torpedoes. It's thematic, and that's key to a Star Wars game. And that you see. I've seen Darth Vader pop up with a TIE swarm frequently in 2.5. Occasionally even doing quite well competitively. And then Luke with a squadron of X-Wings or Y-Wings, you see that, but they're almost always named. And that kind of gets at the point here, is Luke leading that squadron of generics hasn't really happened. The problem here still remains, though, in that block paragraph in the middle, that, let's see, what is this? If anything is so good it's an auto-include, that's a failure of design. You have to pick between all these options. This is not about making generics always a cheap value option. There are legitimate and interesting cases where a generic might be more expensive than a named pilot, but with more flexibility in loadout. And I love that point, but that really hits that line we keep talking about where generics are cumulative. You can never price a generic as a single ship. You have to price it every single time as 5 of them or 4 of them or however many will squeeze into a list. So that really has to hold some of them back to the point where they can never be toe-to-toe on par with a named pilot, or at least not one of the best named pilots. So there always has to be a lever where generics are a little bit below the named pilots just because you can take multiple copies of them. And that is really kind of the core point I don't think we're ever going to get past. From a design perspective, if you're designing points, if you're designing rules, if you start to see some of the things that can be done with generics, every single person who's taken a look at this has at some point looked at it and been like, maybe we need to dial these generics back a bit. And it's not always the case. So there are cases where in 2nd edition and 1st edition, most generics were fine. And really, most generics are fine. They were rarely tournament competitive, though. And that's really a challenge, too, is the point where generics are tournament competitive is pretty much always the point where they're overpowered, or at least the ones that are tournament competitive are overpowered. And that's a challenge. And there still is nothing at all keeping you from running a bunch of generics in 2.5 and in the XWA points either. There are actually certain things that encourage you to do that. XWA in particular, I think, did a really good job by adding generics with a lot of loadout, so you can really play around with them. But that is always a risky move. I've already seen people doing stuff with the Skurg bombers. The generic Skurg bombers are very frightening, and they're generic, so you can have as many as you can afford. So go ahead and go on to the next one. These are the comments in a Facebook group I shared this, and a lot of support for the commenters, which is great to see. And the same thing, we're going to go in reverse here. Nicholas Durand. I was always a big generic lover in 1.0, 2.0, and even in the short while I played AMG's 2.5. Not for the pure spam ability or the mechanical potential, but more for playing Ace plus generics lists that was very much in line of what I wanted to play thematically. I got a lot of fun out of the game playing this kind of list. And there it's cool where you've got your Ace that you have to figure out how that flies with their extra abilities and their higher initiative. And then your generic swarm could just be all identical, where you do reduce that complexity. But also having all your ships at the same initiative is really powerful, because then you can choose the order they activate in, both to shoot and to maneuver and do their actions. So very cool stuff you can do with that. For my part, I think the best fix to generic spam problem would be to implement force org chart style chassis limits. For example, if you think playing 3 TIE defenders is too much, you implement an arbitrary rule that says no more than 2 TIE defenders in a list. If you think playing 4 fangs is too much, you say no more than 3 fangs. I had some feedback from former X-Wing devs that such a solution would implement slightly too much complexity to the game, and that was never really in line with the game's design goals of being easy to pick up and create lists to play with, which is a totally reasonable take. I think that problem with spamming generics is unavoidable, though. As long as a solution doesn't exist, the way AMG balanced generics out of the game, just replace them with spamming the most efficient named pilots instead. Which is the same problem framed differently, sure. And that opened up another big can of worms, what with just how many abilities each ship would carry. Yeah, especially when we saw some of the really, really cheap standard loadout ones, like Hole Okund, who I flew at a tournament. Yeah, when you have a 3-pointer that reads like a book, that is definitely not great. And even with more tailored limitations, regardless of any solution you can think about, competitive list building will always be, at least in part, about cramming as much value as you can in a list as efficiently as possible. Very true. A lot of great points in that. And the force organization part, I'm really interested in. And you can take 2 approaches to that. The first is nerfing things, like you can never take more than 3 TIE defenders. The other is buffing things, where if you take this specific organization, for example, Luke plus 3 generics, you get some bonus. So you can make combinations more competitively viable if they are taken within a specific design, and that would let you add to the theme. That would let you play around with this a lot. It's a pretty cool design space that we've seen a little bit in Legion again. So things like the 501st, for example, you can take the themed Anakin Skywalker's clone trooper force with Anakin and get some bonuses to what you're able to do for what cost. I really love that idea, arguably a little bit more than kind of limiting things. I would rather add incentives than take things away. Yeah, so that's a conversation I'd definitely like to continue, and definitely an interesting space, and I really appreciate Nicholas for putting that in there. Continuing, John Wilder. I did like to fly a TIE Swarm and Vulture Swarm, but even though I like flying a Swarm, my preferences did match AMG's attitude that they wanted to play Star Wars games with Star Wars characters they know and love. It's why I play Shatterpoint and not Legion, sure. But I play Legion for the named characters too. But I know that is not everyone's view, so I think there needs to be a better way to balance them in 2.5. If I designed 2.5, I would at least double the points, sure, to win a game to 40, which is something the XWA has talked about down the road. That would require a lot of rebalancing the objectives and how they score, and perhaps they tried it, and that is why they went with 20. But I would like to have more resolution on the different ships. The I-1 generic ties are a point cheaper than the I-2 generic ties. Okay. The other alternative seems to be just have them priced in a way that no one will take them, which is what we had under AMG. But that seems to mess up list building. We need some low point ships to fill in small gaps in a list, sure. But that was, even with the launch of 2.5, I remember that there were two 2-point Z95s in Scum. And every single Scum list started with the 4 points you needed to do 2 Z95s and then went from there. Overnight, the 2-point ships were the most flown ships in the entire game across every single faction. That very clearly had to be dialed back right away because it just killed list variety, which was the exact opposite of what the goal was. And that's a case where you could kind of figure out a way where, like, I don't know how you could do that. Something where the last ship you buy costs 1 ship's less, or if you only take 1 of X chassis, you get a point off. Like some way that could give you the option to have that cheaper ship without having that be the starting point for list building. And I don't know really how to approach that. Let's see. Sammy says, there was a time when AMG thought Tempest should be 3 points with shield upgrade. Yeah, 6 Tempest plus Night Beast broke the game. That's the Tempest Squadron pilot. I forget what ship that is. But yeah, I could see how that would be a huge problem. 2.0 generics versus aces was balanced. 2.5 was not. Either generics were too expensive or too cheap. I'm so glad that our group plays Legacy. And on that, this is where I wanted to actually look at some lists. This is one of the ones that had me head scratching the most, because I've seen a lot of comments that say in 2.0 generics were cheap. Generics versus aces were cheap. But I'm going to see how that looks. So let's go ahead and jump to that. That was the last comments we're going to cover. And this is cool. I'll put this link in there. Someone actually cataloged the entire Atomic Mass Games forum. So the old school forum, you can go through it and actually go to X-Wing squad lists going back 600 pages to early 2015, which was the 3rd year of the game, because the game launched in 2012. So we're looking at 100-point lists, and let's see. I'm going to go just based on engagement. So on this page, we've got a 19 replies on this guy, your most hated list. This is Eden Vril. I don't even remember who that is. With experimental interface and Lando. Dagger Squadron is an A-wing with Tactician. No, that's a B-wing. With Tactician, maybe Sensor Jammer. Hobby with R3A2. I should remember these. God, this is, yeah, okay. Not a common list for me, but the ties have to rest sometimes. Faced Echo with Sensor Jammer, Carnage Axe with Shield, and Dark Curse with Shield. So Dark Curse is TIE Fighter, Carnor's TIE Interceptor, who I missed that guy. Echo is a Phantom. So right out of the gate, you can see these are both 3-ship lists. So that's, at the 100-point scale, you had smaller list sizes. That's the thing in 2.5 is that we end up with big lists, a lot of bloat. So 4 and 5 is kind of the average list size, where before it was 3 and even 2. There were 2-ship competitive lists that I ran a fair amount. Couldn't do anything, probably the least fun I've had playing a game. Don't like this. Right there. I don't like lists that are optimized but have no real feel for the Star Wars mythos. And that's something I often think about with generic lists too. But yeah, here we go. I find it a bit boring to play against Echo-based lists because it's more catch me if you can. I usually do, but I like a straight out dogfight. So this is somebody right there talking about kind of the 1.0, 2.0 thing about ships running away was a major piece of the dogfighting aspect, and I didn't like it. Interesting. These are from 2014. Okay, so this is actually, yeah, it's earlier. Eden Vril, is that a... I should know who that is. And we'll go ahead and go back. Ooh, there must be a better way to do that. Let's look at max damage dual decimators. So we got Rear Admiral Shiranu in the decimator, Expose, Gunner, Mercenary Copilot. God, Expose. And Patrol Leader Darth Vader. So that is just 2 decimators. There it is, a 2-ship list. Ugh. And here's the option where you can change out upgrades to upgrade your pilot, which is a thing that's a list building mechanic that I do and don't miss. So being able to shave points so you can change who your pilot is, and this is an example that is one of the kinds of things you see where it's shaving upgrade points on one pilot to upgrade to another named pilot. So that is interesting. And they're just talking about other stuff. I gotta remember what Expose is. Let's see. That's not gonna work, is it? There it is. Oh, good times. Till the end of the round, increase your primary weapon value by 1 and decrease your agility by... Jesus. Oh god, 1.0 upgrades. Holy crap. It's insane looking back on this stuff and being like, wait, that was a thing? Okay. Yeah, alright. So 1.0 was nuts. And then we'll actually see who's Eden. Eden Vril was the Outrider, the YT-2400. Okay. When performing a primary weapon attack against the stress ship, roll 1 additional attack die. Native 2 attack dice. Wow, that's wild. Okay. Man, 1.0. You see the squad points on the card and the slots printed on it too, until you busted out your hole punch and your Sharpie to fix it when it changed. Yeah, let's keep poking around here. There are a few more. I'm going to jump a little bit further because I want to see kind of closer to the end of first edition, which was late 2018. That's not going to be it. We're going to go to 6. Thinking 2018, 2018, 2018. We're still in 2020, which was the very end. So we'll get to that. 2020, whew, man, 600 pages goes, oh, there we go, 2019. And 2019 was immediately after the launch of second edition, so we'll get there too. So we're looking at like 35. 2019, we're getting there. I really enjoyed bumping through this, just getting the walk down memory lane to check this out. Oh, there we go, 2018, November 2018, and it was September 2018 that second edition ended. October, yeah, okay, let's go a little further back. October, man, this is very well used. And of course there was a big bump, in interest when the game switched over to second edition. A lot of people were curious to try it and see it, and then we saw things change again. Oh, jeez, here we go. Oof. So we're at June of 2018, which is near the end of first edition. Not a blocking list. I do want to talk about this, is that blocking in first edition and second edition, if a ship was blocked, it could not shoot at all. It was just like landing on a rock, so they couldn't shoot. Well, they couldn't shoot the ship they were touching. Excuse me. And they got no actions whatsoever. So blocking was a lot more powerful in both first and second edition. And there were mechanics around it, but yeah. All right, let's see. Super casual, Ray with expertise. Expertise is the one I believe that lets you choose whether your initiative is 1 higher or lower, but this may be different. Oh, this thing, yeah. So this is indicative like the late stage X-Wing stuff that got real dumb at the end of 1.0. So look at this. When attacking, if you are not stressed, you may change all of your eyeball results to hit results. Just a free focus mod. It doesn't even say then gain a stress token. You just do it. Which, pff, bananas. And there were more things that dealt stress in first edition, but that was the level of power here. And imagining that in second edition or 2.5 is just crazy. Yeah. Woof, man, wild. Okay. And that's the kind of stuff that we saw used a lot. See, and then saw with push the limit, and that is just a built-in linked action. And you can do any action in your bar and then take a stress to do a second action on your bar. So you could chain any single action into another one. This is one of the most powerful upgrades ever printed in X-Wing and was everywhere. We got Collision Detector, Targeting Scrambler, Recon Specialist, Janor's Title, Renegade Refit. I did really enjoy that. I wish we saw more thematic configurations that would change the way a ship is built. We see a little bit of them. We've got the S-foils and X-Wings. We've got the B-Wing pivot, or the spinny thing. Yeah, there was stuff there. And Saw Gerrera, I believe, was a VCX pilot. Might be U-Wing. I should remember that. Engine upgrade just gave any ship boost. You just gave it a white boost action on its action bar, which of course combined with push the limit then gave you a link to boost with anything. Oh man, wild. Okay, yeah, so Saw is the U-Wing here. So we've got Rey and the Falcon, and at the time too, in 1.0, Resistance and Rebels were in the same faction, so you could have Rey and Saw flying together. Thrust Corrector. While defending, if you have 3 or fewer stress tokens, you may receive 1 stress token and cancel all your dice results. I don't even remember this. What is this? If you have 3 or fewer stress tokens, you may receive 1 stress token and cancel all of your dice results. If you do, add 1 evade result to your roll. Your dice cannot be modified again during this attack. Wow, this is gain a stress to just evade, but wow, okay. Can only equip this upgrade if your hull value is 4 or lower. What a weird upgrade. Seems good, but yeah, again, 2-ship list, and one thing that's standing out to me is that all of these lists have had named pilots. I haven't seen a single generic yet, except maybe 1 filler in one of the Empire lists from before. Ooh, wait a minute. So let's see another one here. Let's see one with big engagement. Wingman for Rack wanted. Ooh. We've got Rear Admiral Shirinu and then Countess Ryad in the TIE Defender. Veteran Instincts just adds 2 to your pilot ability. There's that, okay. Well, solid, the list did underperform a bit, so I thought about combining with a TIE Silencer, coming up with this list. Oof. And there again, you could have a Decimator with a Silencer because First Order and Empire were combined. Advanced sensors on Kylo, advanced optics, auto thrusters, and you are seeing a lot of points put into upgrades and pilots. This was pretty cool, so just looking at this. Not a fan of Rack and Silencers Kylo. And Rack Vader was actually a list at the time. Sunter fell. Oof, boy. Royal Guard tie. I don't remember what that did either. All right, let's see. We got a memory lane. We're here. Royal Guard tie title. There were a ton of these at the end of 1.0. You may equip up to 2 different modification upgrades instead of 1, so it doubles your modification options. You cannot equip this card if your pilot skill is 4 or lower, so it's ace only upgrade. That's pretty cool. I like that. Lets you spend more points on your AC ships to give them more. And that was really nice because there was a moment where aces were just dead, completely dead in first edition because they released the twin laser turret and a lot of ships that could abuse it to just like wipe out any low hit point ship. They could just guaranteed hit it all the time. And that was a problem. So they added in auto thrusters, but then AC ships had to choose auto thrusters or any other mod. So you could have Sunter with a auto thrusters, but no targeting computer, so he couldn't target lock. So that was one of the things that was done to kind of bring those back up, which is cool. Added a lot to the AC TIE Interceptor, and being my personal favorite ship, I appreciated that. But yeah, let's keep looking. Let's see what else is here. And then we'll bump again a little bit into early 2.0. Just kind of wanted to get a look at this. Palp's New Wings. A lot of Empire stuff, or that may just be what I'm clicking on. You got Quick Draw in the TIE SF, First Order, Captain Faroff in the Reaper. Adaptability is free. That is nuts, where you could, at the start of the game, you could choose whether to add or subtract 1 from your pilot skill so that you could go second or go first at will. And again, this also included bidding, so I'm actually a little bit surprised that all of these go straight to 100 points because you could spend fewer points to guarantee you going first or second, I believe. Pretty sure that was a piece of 1.0. I know it was a part of 2nd edition. Let me check adaptability just to see what that does. Pretty sure it was the pilot skill. Yes. One side is increase your pilot skill by 1, one is decrease your pilot skill by 1. So when you deployed your cards on the table, you could choose which side to have, which really it was pretty cool to have that, but alongside bids, it really was a little bit abusive in terms of what you could do. Just it takes the slot, but it's free. This is pretty wild. All right, let's look around here. And again, I will be linking to this so that y'all can poke around here if you'd like to. Let's see. Let's go one page further forward and see if we still have the same timeline. Should be about right. And there's a lot of engagement from the Empire players. We've got Ezra in the Sheathipede. Now that's pretty cool. Wired. Okay, that gives you bonuses for being stressed. God, so much stuff that never came back. The art did, though. When attacking or defending, if you are stressed, you may reroll one or more of your eyebrow results. God! Okay, for 1 point, you just get a free reroll. It's like heroic with no downside. Except you have to be stressed to do it, but that's almost better. Especially for Ezra, who likes being stressed. And multi-spectral camouflage. Oh god, okay, gotta look this up. Pretty sure I misspelled camouflage. I did. Thanks, Britain. Got an extra U in it. Small ship only modification. After you receive a red target lock token, if you have only one red target lock token, roll a defense die. On an evade result, remove one target. Okay. Holy crap. A 1 point modification where you're just like, nah, you didn't lock me. Wow. Wow. And here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, a 4-ship list, and hobby, I believe, is an X-wing, and running just the -2 point upgrades are just wild, and usually they just okay. Let's look. We're looking, and then I'll jump to 2.0 where it actually gets a little bit less crazy. Renegade refit. This X-wing. All right, so hobby is an X-wing. T65 X-wing U-wing only, so you could reduce the cost of a U-wing by 2 also. And that's not as dramatic because this was a 100-point system. This wasn't the 20-point system. But still, that's no joke. Just be like, you're cheaper. But it takes your torpedo slot to do it. Okay, there we go. Either it takes your torpedo slot or you can only equip it if you have a torpedo slot. That may be... Yeah, okay. You may equip 2 different modification upgrades. The squad point cost of each of your equipped talent upgrades is reduced by 1 to a minimum of 0. So if you're able to take 2 talents, you could potentially get 2 free talents, which is just crazy what you can do with that. And that was one of the things added to the game because competitively, X-wings and U-wings were not performing at all. So they put stuff in here to make them good, and it got extremely good. And as you can see, 1.0 is full of that. And all of these, that's 3... There's a bonus of 6 points on this list because it's double U-wing, X-wing. So you've got -2, -2, -2. Wild. Wild. I wonder, does this work? It does. Oh, look at that. Man, Yasby is good stuff. So this actually still works. This is a historic legacy. Oh god, flight assist astromech. You cannot attack ships outside your firing arc, which only matters to turret ships. After you execute a maneuver, if you did not overlap a ship or obstacle and there are no enemy ships inside your firing arc at range 1 to 3, you may perform a free boost or barrel roll action. Alright. God, what a time. What a different time. Alright, so we're going to jump to, in the interest of making this reasonably short, I'm going to go ahead and jump to the 2nd edition time. And we're going to look at, and these are actually pretty close. So this is 2019, so this is late 2.0. Ketsu and Boba. Love it. Love it. These are 2 of my favorite pilots. This would be extended because Ketsu I don't think was legal. I don't remember though, actually. It's crazy to see this. 85-point Boba Fett because in 2nd edition it was 200 points. Prockets, Percop, Fearless, Greedo. Wow. Okay. Ketsu with the Shadowcaster Maul. Fearless. Interesting. Hopefully always be engaging first to make use of Greedo. Double focus for potential Prockets. Used for offense and defense as well as keeping in close range. It's fine. My initial reaction to Proton Rocks is not to take them, since Boba always wants range 1 to have that double modded, and you're only getting an extra die over his primary once for 7 points, sure. Fly Casual is already around, of course. Can only have Greedo Gunner on Boba with Marauder, so interesting. Because Slave 1 didn't add the Gunner slot. Slave 1 at that point was, I believe, also the title that you changed the dial, or was that the 1.0 version? I'm probably mixing that up. Contraband Cybernetics, that's familiar. Yeah. Yep. It's Kira. Man, it's crazy to see all this stuff. So a lot of stuff that's very familiar was already out in 2.0. I just saw Kira Crew, Perceptive Copilot, of course, this goes way back, Greedo Gunner, hull or shield upgrade. Yeah, okay. But just to look at the points here, this is a lot of points. So 85 points on the pilot, 110 total with upgrades for the one pilot, 88 with the second one, and total 198 for a 2-point bid with the initiative 5 on both. So that's interesting. Oh, an ordnance swarm. All right, let's see it. Let's see a swarm. And so this is our first generic list. This may be the first generics I've seen at all in any of these. And I've just been clicking around and haven't really seen generics appear. I'll keep looking because I want to find some decent generics, but looking at this, false transponder codes at 2 points. Oof. So we got thread tracers, and that is if that hits, it gives all your friendlies a target lock on the target. So we got your binary pirates sitting at 22 points, which is cheap and 200. So 2 with thread tracers, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 with ion missiles. So is that 8? 8. That is 8 binary pirates, and those, I believe, are the scum generic Z95s. It's a lot of ion, so yeah, here, ion is more for extra dice than anything. False transponder codes where you can fit it, sure. Like it, FDC should keep the tracer carriers alive. Ion is good at a hit through anyway. Here's a rebel version, 1 less E95, which is still I2, and a selfless mixed in. Ooh, selfless. Do we want to see it? Let's see it. And that's in 2nd edition, so that actually I think is still in the game. Yeah, there we go. Will a friendly ship at range 0 to 1 defends before the neutralized result stuff? You're in the attack arc. You may suffer 1 critical damage to cancel a crit. Okay. Just interesting. Throwing some in there to spread the damage around so you're not, so it's hard for your opponent to pick apart specific targets. And this is Tala Squadron pilots, so these are Rebel Z95s. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them. So 1 less, but 1, 2, 3... 3 of them get concussion missiles, which is a much more threatening piece. And of course, with the selfless, you can always take damage. You can just spread damage around. Yeah, so there are generic swarms. I don't know how competitive either of those are going to be. Since we've seen generally smaller squad lists up to now, yeah. Yeah, Drea. Drea with generic spam was crazy. And I'm not seeing too many abusive lists. Let me take a look at... Let's see what else is in here. Kanan, SK, V-Wing Aces, and Jedi, because with 2.0 we did get the Republic. HMP Gunship help, and the Separatists. Finding friends for the Rebel YT 1300. Wow, that's a lot. There are 4 pages of comments on this one, so we gotta check this one out. We got Rebel Lando with Ninum, Jake in the A-Wing. There we go, we got some generic T-65s. Nice. With just S-foils. Free actions from Jake and Lando. Let's see, there's another reference here to Leia plus 3 Blue Squadron escorts. A lot will come down to player skill. I've seen a decent number of Lando or Leia, Luke, and a third. Often a named B-Wing, Braylon or 10, or an A-Wing like Arvel or Jake. Just position him on his own action if enemy gets close. Yeah. Nice. He can double action himself. Wow, that's pretty good. Lando to generic generic T-65 X-Wings, and then Arvel. Huh. So we are seeing some generics in here. But most of these are still named, like even this one, triple named. And most of the really menacing lists I remember named, all named. Evan Verlaine is a K-Wing, if I'm not mistaken. Oh. Technically Han Luke. Evan herself is boosted and has survived far longer than she should have, with the opponent got fed up and chased her down instead. Only 2 hull left versus TL Force mounted proton torpedoes from Kylo. Yuck. Whew. Alright, so we're not going to spend too much time on that. I'm going to poke around a little bit more and see stuff. I'm looking for that mix of generics and named pilots, and I'm seeing some of that. Scum hyperspace. I always want to see Scum, but... Laser and Ion. Selfless list Tetris. 4070s. Ew. But are they generic? Nope. Jess, Bastion, NEMI, and 1 generic. So you've got generics sprinkled in here in a way you can do now just fine. It's not unusual to have a little mix of generics and named pilots, and there's nothing wrong with doing that now. People tend not to, but you certainly can, especially with the XWA points where some of those generics have a lot of upgrade points. But you're seeing basically nothing that's all generics, except the Z95 spam. So there are a couple things I was looking for here, looking at these old lists. Number 1 was, do generics appear at all? The answer is yes. Number 2 was, do you get only generic lists? And again, we were looking kind of at competitiveness. We've just taken a completely random sample of all the lists that anyone's throwing around. So we're going to look at some more, but you don't see pure generic lists, really. You do see a lot of pure named lists, even in first edition, even in second edition. It's named pilots have been kind of dominant all along. You got triple tri-fighters. What is this? Fearsome Predator. Ooh, I like it. That's quasi named because that's a triple pipped. It's triple pipped. It's not exactly a generic, but tri-fighters. 4 points more than TIE Interceptor is just better. Yeah. Yeah. And the Tri-Fighter, there's a lot of room to play with the design because they are more limited. So they are literally pipped, so you can play with them a lot. But also you can't spam them the way you can spam some of the generic TIE Interceptors. I don't know where I was going with that. It's getting late. Yeah. And then there's a big debate about which is better, Interceptors or Tri-Fighters, or if they're even comparable. And a thing that you get with Tri-Fighters that you don't get with TIE Interceptors is your relays. Your relays and your ability to share tokens both give them a big bump that isn't necessarily covered in just the raw stats. Let's see, we got, oh, there we go, Trandoshans Slaver, which is a generic YV. Han Gunner, very nice. Then we've got Dengar. Oh, I miss 2.0 Dengar. I miss 1.0 Dengar, actually. 2.0 Dengar was not. Had all the downsides that he does now without some of the upsides. And then Freighter Captain. Okay, here. So we've got 2 generics in this list. Technically 3 if you count that. So we've got a Scum Falcon, a YV, Dengar, and then this guy. I don't think that's a very good list. And this is December. Ooh, this is still 2.0. We've gone a little bit far back, so this actually is dipping into 2.5 because second edition ended in November of 2020. So let's go back a bit and see what more is being talked about. There we go. Rebel Initiative Killing, Republic Beef. Ooh, God, both what you want. So we've got Thane. This again is Rebel. So we got, that's the T-65. Hera Attack Shuttle, Braylon B-Wing, Ten-Num B-Wing. So B-Wing, B-Wing, Shuttle, type, or X-Wing. 4-ship named. We've got Wedge, Hera, Nora, and the Y-Wing, and Thane. Again, 4-ship named. Hera, Nora, Thane, 10. Always a fan of the named B-Wing punts, but at I-4 they won't be initiative killing much. All right. All right, we're just poking around here. Let's see one more list. Dash's Drinking Buddies. Let's see what else we got. Agony Deplete, Star Fortress spam. Goodness. Twin Fire Spray list. 4 Horsemen of the Republic. Yeah, why not? We'll take a look at it. Republics, nice. Plo with CLT. 212th is the, that's a generic... What's the thing called? Or lat. That's a generic lat. Excuse me. All of those were yelling at your screen right there. Y-Wing and Arc. Interesting. And so you do see a little bit of generics sprinkled in there. And in the case where generics are sprinkled in here, that was almost always because they were a little bit cheaper than the named options. And you could still use them as support ships. Like in this case, you could dump in a bunch of Little Flat on Warthog. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, so you can go a little bit cheaper on the pilot to go generic support ship to then load it up with the crew pieces. And with support ships in particular, the generics being cheap kind of works, right? That's a case where I could definitely see them getting downed a little bit. It's the more offensive spam ones being the biggest problem if they get a little bit too good. One more. Son of yet another bro boss list. A lot of people tinkering around with Republican separatists. Ooh, Rax Lone Strike Force. Let's see that. There we go. Planetary Sentinels. I believe those are Reapers? So triple generic Reapers. There we go. Okay. Spam tech. So this was when Nantech spam was an issue. 3 Alpha Interceptors. So this is one that used the named and the generic mini swarm with it. Okay. Yeah. Pretty sure those are Reapers. They may be Strikers, but one of the two. One of the ones that boost before it moves. And at that points cost, I'm tempted to say those were Reapers. Heavy hitters. Starkiller Base Pilot, which is the... Oh, there it is. Double Upsilon. Blech. Get a generic Upsilon, a named Epsilon, and then Hollow, the TIE Baron, with a 5-point bid. Blech. And then we've got Ray plus 2 named A-Wings. Yeah, nasty. Nasty, nasty, nasty. I know I keep saying last list, but I really am enjoying poking around this. Hopefully this isn't too boring. Baron Swarm. Let's see what we got here. Ooh. A true swarm. Okay, and this is the TIE Baron. No, this isn't. This is the Inquisitor's TIE. And you can take 7 of them. Wow. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And they're just TIE line fighters with a slightly different dial and shields. Yeah. TIE FO and 6 swarms both mentioned here, so there were generic storms of those. They're slightly higher initiative than other generics, so that's an interesting point. Lots of small single-moded attacks, yeah. Good blocking. And this is one of the things about generic swarm tactics is you would have a great moment where, again, you can choose the order that you activate in if everything has the same initiative, so you could stack your ships in ideal cases to block things and then punish them from the other sides, which you can still do with a combination of coordinators and named pilots that have the same initiative, or you can bring generics for that exact purpose. And you lose some of the utility there because ships can now focus if they're blocked, sure, and they can still shoot at the ship that blocked them, but with a 7 or 8 ship list, that's not something that's too terribly scary, and you can always throw away a couple ships for the position advantage of knowing where that opponent's going to be and also being able to hit it from different sides. So there's a lot there. So anyway, so we've looked at this. I know that I could check out some tournament results. If anyone has an ideal spot to look at, like just an archive of tournament winning lists, like top 5s going all the way back through 2nd edition and 1st edition, I would love to find that. I don't know if that's still in List Fortress. I should dig around though. So back to the generic conversation. We'll have more. Hopefully this has been fun, and we'll talk again soon.